I remember that Nick had a list of songs that he'd worked on for some time, and some of them were really uh, woeful songs, like "Something" by George Harrison. He wanted to do at one stage, but as far as I understood it, the point of the record was to make a record that didn't have this enormous critical importance attached to it, where it was just him doing something that he enjoyed without the pressure of having to come up with something that people would deem as being important.
You know, the the Stalinism of post-punk was an awful thing to have to react against. I mean, you had to react against it, but it was just awful. It was like PC. You know, that was the beginning of politically and aesthetically correct, except all the judgments were wrong.
I think he fancied doing an album of covers just to tell the remaining birthday party goth sort of people who wanted to put him in a musical straitjacket. I think he wanted to tell them where he was now coming from.
What was good is the fact that they weren't remotely fashionable. They weren't interested in copying any movement. They were marching to their own drum.
For them, it's obviously great fun and a really delicious creative exercise to explore their favourite songs. And for everybody else, it's this, trail of clues that leads you to explore all kinds of other artists.
It was like, wow, if that's what they're listening to, or I mean, it was such this kind of broad and rather odd kind of collection of songs, and if that was what they were drawing upon or what was inspiring them, then it just made them all the more kind of fascinating.
I just thought it was amazing the choice of songs on the record. Some of the things you maybe would expect, some of the kind of like blues influenced stuff, but you definitely wouldn't expect, The Carnival Is Over. And that was one of my favorite tracks on that record. It was I think that is what makes the essence of a great covers record, is the choice of the songs and just not making it too obvious.
When they became the Bad Seeds, they started looking backwards to music that, with Kicking Against the Pricks, I guess, to music that had influenced them as children.
Coming from that time, I think if you're interested in music, you couldn't help but soak up. There was so many. It was so rich, the kind of I guess the references that were around then at that point, what was in the mainstream, and sonically, I mean, and music had gone through so many changes in what, looking back on it, was such an incredibly short period of time.
Nick had a great part in bringing somebody like Gene Pitney or somebody like Roy Orbison and all these people, to the attention of this kind of new wave or, clientele. Who were like the nucleus of the Nick Cave fans, and I think he did a really good job in irritate people in their sometimes youthful, narrow, very narrow kind of definition what's good or so, and to teach them a couple of lessons if you want. And to broaden their horizons.
It was such an interesting transition to go from, in the birthday party, he'd been almost like kind of a rock shaman in the mold of Jim Morrison or Iggy Pop, and now he was like, more like a showman. He was like, he wanted to sort of be the guy who could deliver a song, and like interpret it.
To make it interesting, you have to try and take it off into a different field, and I think that not a note for note version. And Nick's really, for me, a modern day soul singer.
What makes a good cover is a performer owning it and putting their spin on a piece and adding something new, but more than that, just like owning it.
It's pretty renegade, actually, because there's almost no respect for the original song, but at the same time, there's so much respect for the original song, that it's choosing to just completely reinterpret it.
To me, that makes a good cover version because they've understood that the artist has understood or felt, the truth or the feeling in a song, and they recognize something in themselves that they can hear in the song or feel in the song, and it's a shared feeling. And when they record that song or sing it, you can feel that they're being truthful, when they sing it or play it because they feel the song.
Kicking Against the Pricks was a great idea, and it made me track down a John Lee Hooker record that I hadn't heard before, just for I'm Gonna Kill That Woman.
To have Nick sing a John Lee Hooker song is, there's no better combination.
It's just so dirty and ugly that you really feel the message behind that song.
It's like Dostoevsky or something. He's going to kill the woman and he's using God as like justification for the murder. Yeah. I've felt like murdering a woman before, I think it's almost inhuman in a way not to at least think about it.
It almost seemed like a Bad Seeds song, but they never wrote it. It had all the elements, and I guess that's sometimes where I know, particularly in England at the time, where Nick Cave, this, that, it's alternative, but it kind of struck me with the Kicking Against the Pricks album that, in fact, it kind of reaffirmed to me that they were actually traditionalists.
It's a very modern concept that one's album needs to be entirely original. It used to be the complete opposite was more often the case.
There was a real nod to, real like classical songs and things like that, which, I found it just seemed, it was really fantastic to see them trying to, I guess, deconstruct this art form, that had been around it's been around forever and find their own take on it.
It's almost like jazz, where there's a standard and the greatest artists can take a standard and make it something of their own.
At its best, a cover version is just that. It's just another mutation of a great song, and some miss and are dreadful, and some are fantastic. And some of my favourite recordings ever are cover versions.
What's so astounding about this album is the kind of discipline with which they take these kind of vessels of brilliant songs. Not necessarily like great songs, like not necessarily kind of like enjoyable songs, enjoyable originals, but really well crafted, really well structured kind of verse chorus songs.
There's something about understanding a song through somebody else's perspective, their delivery or their arrangement or their the intonation of the delivery, that just to me reveals something about the song that isn't necessarily there in the original.
I really like it. It's one of the albums that I listen to a lot. It's like, to me, it was like incredibly emotional. Muddy Water and Sleeping Annalie are just so evocative and very gothic and just extremely visual too. I think that all the songs on it have this very visual aspect to them.
I have such an intense memory from my childhood that my grandmother, by chance, late in life, she was able to afford a large Lincoln Continental. And as a small child, I sat in the back of this enormous car. And I had a very glamorous cousin from California who had a huge frosted platinum beehive and frosted white lipstick and high heels and a low-cut mini dress. I just thought she was the most glamorous thing ever. And I remember her sitting in the back seat of that car with her and her playing the ukulele and singing Long Black Veil.
The stories that those songs tell are told with such perfect diction that, you know, you just sit back and you listen to the story that the songs tell.
And I thought it was sort of deep a part of my heritage and ancestry, you know, because my ancestors go back quite a ways, being from the southern and western United States. I have since learned that Long Black Veil was written in 1959 and was kind of a folk song revival song. I thought that was an Old West song like El Paso. And then I found out that was also only written in 1959.
I think he was one of those people who kind of made people, you know, he made people listen. A lot of people probably listen to the first time to things like country music and realize that, you know, beneath the sweetness, it's actually a very harsh view of the world often, you know, and that it does sort of deal with these quite elemental things of desolation and heartbreak and kind of a destitution of the soul.
I think a measure of how much he seemed different to what else was going on was that in the 1980s, if you said that you liked country music, you know, old style country music, the music press and most of your mates would just absolutely laugh.
I would never in a million years, prior to that record, never in a million years would I have listened to country music. You know, I just thought it was music that had been invented by white people to lynch black people to. I mean, that in my ignorant mindset at the time was what I thought. And I thought, no way in hell am I going to listen to this.
So, you know, after listening to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, I did check out things like George Jones and so it sort of, you know, led me to music I probably wouldn't have discovered without him, you know, bringing it into our world, kind of thing, with Kicking Against the Pricks.
Bad Seeds are kind of they're the best cover band that I've ever heard. They just the reinterpretations on the Kicking Against the Pricks record are just phenomenal. I mean, I'd definitely rather listen to Hey Joe on that record than, you know, Jimi Hendrix's. It's just a way of sort of taking something in and using it as a starting point, and then just completely making it their own.
Hey Joe live made an incredible impression on me. Seeing them live in Kilburn in London, Nick, in the early days, I was a little bit reluctant to be down the front, and there was a period sort of in the 80s, 90s when I'd be down the front row with Andrew too.
They started kicking into Hey Joe, sort of went on for a little while, and then Nick strode out.
With an incredible grey suit, with a red bow tie, and with his hair back, and just grabbing that microphone and singing. It was just, that reminds me, because there were times when we shared that front row experience together.
Kicking Against the Pricks has the greatest version of Hey Joe that's ever been recorded. I will go on a limb and say that.
That's a song that's really well known. The Hendrix version is one thing. Then you have the kind of the Byrds and Love. They do a kind of garagey West Coast rock kind of version.
As a 60s fan, I never really hit it with the West Coast psychedelic thing, but Hey Joe was always a track that I really quite enjoyed. Jimi Hendrix, it was great.
I didn't actually like the original. I thought it was shit.
But then again, Hey Joe is a dangerous song to do because it's been covered so many times.
The Tim Rose version is great. And then there was kind of like garagey versions like The Leaves and Love's version, which I didn't really get into too much, but Jimi Hendrix's version was great, but it was like kind of a more rock thing. And the Bad Seeds version is just the darkest, most sinister version of the song. I mean, it just adds a whole new level to that song.
I didn't really understand what Hey Joe was until I heard Nick Cave's version.
It was like he plugged himself into the spirit of the song, which, you know, it's a murder ballad. but he'd put this murderous drone into it.
It just takes the framework and rebuilds the whole thing. And it becomes more brooding and moody and menacing.
I don't know, there's just something about that album, that first side of the album, that makes you want to make really fantastic, scary music.
Kicking Against the Pricks was the first album that I heard by Nick. I'd come across him before from, he was on the front cover of The Enemy.
I went to a record shop and bought Rain Dogs, and they said, really, listen to Kick Against the Pricks. And I just thought I might as well give this record a try, because I'd never really gave it the time of day. And I kind of bought both of them and took them home. Listened to Jockey Full of Bourbon by Tom Waits about 1,000 times. I never really got round to listening to Kick Against the Pricks until Luke, my mate, came round and said, listen to that album. You must listen to that album.
But I hadn't really heard anything, and there was no way of getting to hear anything. And then he was on the Tube, which and he did The Singer, which was such it was a really amazing revelation, seeing somebody come on and do this song that I hadn't heard before, and this person that I'd heard about and seen who just looked amazing, and he was just shit. It was really bad. Yeah, just a really shambolic, terrible performance to my ears, but it was utterly captivating and amazing.
I just remember it almost made me cry. It was so beautiful. Just something about it. I didn't even realise it was a covers album at all. And I've never actually listened to the second side of Kick Against the Pricks either, because the first side of that album, I just can't get over it. I just bring the needle back to the first track and listen to it all the way.
I always get a joy out of playing the album. There's albums that I really liked and really got into when I was, when I was a teenager or early 20s, and you go back to and you just can't listen to again. They were terrible. They sounded so great and fresh at the time, but they just sound terrible. And that album, all the Nick albums still sound fresh, but that one, because it was my first experience of him, and it still sounds so fresh. I still get really excited hearing The Singer at any time.
And the lyric of the Singer, I think, really sums up the whole Kicking Against the Pricks album. It says, this is what I do. You might not, I could fall down in the street after singing you this song, and most people probably wouldn't care, but that's tough. This is what I'm going to do. It's not what people expect, the sort of cliche of Nashville and sweet harmony voices and lots of badly played violins. It's tough outlaw country, basically. It's the good stuff.
You could tell it was almost designed to annoy some people because of the choice of songs, but the choice of songs were excellent, and you could see how deeply immersed in certain songwriting traditions Nick either was or was becoming.
A lot of these songs are what you associate with Gold FM and oldies radio today. They're really songs of a bygone era. They're all op shops and cobwebs.
If you'd followed Cave's career, the first two albums, even just his solo career, you didn't have to go back to a birthday party. Kicking Against the Pricks just was a complete surprise. Just came out of nowhere, because here's a guy who's probably one of the most literate lyricists, pop musicians around, musicians around, or even pop musicians, who decided to do in 1986 the kind of post Live Aid era, the sort of nascent era of hip hop. He decides to do an album of cover versions, which includes standards, chamber pop, and stuff that is just not remotely obvious.
I don't think that everything on Kicking Against the Pricks is an improvement against the original. I don't think it's even intended to be, but as a an index of their taste, and it was great.
All Tomorrow's Parties developed into this kind of weird. How do you describe that? I mean, it's like a waltz, but not in waltz time. It's and it could be Nico, but it's not. It's like he managed to get the spirit, except in his voice.
it evolved from an occasion where Nick was sitting around playing the piano and playing that song, and everybody just sort of started singing along. But they were all drunk, and it had a sort of raucousness and a rawness that the recording didn't really attain.
It's almost a reverse interpretation of the Velvet Underground version, just in terms of sort of mood or direction.
It would be very hard to do that song as well or better than the original. I think it's probably one of the least interesting choices on the record because it's got an obvious cool that a lot of the other songs don't have.
You do a good cover when you have the arrogance to think that you have something to add to it. You know, you have to really, I think the performer really needs to feel like, you know, that unspeakable arrogance of thinking he can improve on something he already has been impressed by. You know, and I think that album was a lot of those moments, you know, of thinking, yeah, you know who should sing By the Time I Get to Phoenix? Me. You know, I think that's awesome. It's like, I know that probably sounds insulting, but it's not. It's like, that's what, you know, to perform at all is to engage in an act of supreme egotism.
There's sort of this real duality of ultimate egotism, ultimate self-absorbed thing, and then there's this also real sense of worthlessness or kind of humiliation, because if you say attempt a cover, you attempt anything, you are putting yourself out there, and if you succeed, you're a hero, and if you don't, then you're an absolute fool.
To perform is to say, all these people should pay money to listen to me, and I will give them an experience that they will really enjoy. That's hopeless arrogance. Most people will never experience that degree of arrogance. And so to do a cover, you have to step it up even further and go, you know what? Glenn Campbell didn't really succeed in getting this song across. I am the man who will do that. And the thing is, with Nick Cave songs, he does that, and then with Nick Cave covers, and he takes that step, and then actually follows through, you know, then improves on By the Time I Get to Phoenix.
That's actually what I said when I reviewed, more or less what I said when I reviewed Kicking Against the Pricks in my first year as a music writer, which was that it was actually it wasn't a kind of selflessness that was making him do these songs. It was a kind of further stage in his kind of, you know, huge self-importance and arrogance. You know, the idea that just the way he'll sing this song is enough of a signature to make it his own, you know. And you know, I think he did.
I think, you know, many people can sing a song or record a song, but they don't capture the essence or the soul of the song. And I think when the Bad Seeds do By the Time I Get to Phoenix, they get right to the soul of the song, you know.
I'm kind of the opinion that Nick and the Bad Seeds can just have that sense of violent ownership over whatever they do.
Because, you know, music's not just notes, chords and melody, it's, you know, it's feeling, attitude, atmosphere. I think the great thing about Nick and the Bad Seeds is they understand that.
I'm living in LA and I'm working stripping in the Valley on a day shift, you know, because I'd just gotten clean, so I'd gotten a little bit chubby in rehab, and I just couldn't go back to any of the places I'd worked at. So I was doing these day shifts, and it was 89. So basically I was almost 30. All the girls I worked with were about 18 years old, and every one of them had either dated or supported a member of Guns N' Roses. So all they played all day was the first Guns N' Roses album. So I'd go on stage and I'd dance to By the Time I Get to Phoenix. And I remember it was this long stage, like 4 in the afternoon on a Monday, this long stage with all the strip club lights, and the club's empty, but 3 or 4 old men sitting around the stage. And I'm coming out, and I have Nick Cave singing By the Time I Get to Phoenix, and I'm looking, and all the old men were singing along because they knew the words. And it was like this really bizarre music video, because I thought, I wonder if they noticed that it's not the version that they know.
But it was just so beautiful because they were all singing along. And I'm like walking down the stage naked, and it was so surreal. It was just like that perfect moment for a song.
They did a cover version of the song called The Hammer Song, which was a really nice, truthful and evocative sort of tribute to Alex, who I think it might have died by then, but he was great, Alex Harvey, because he was around at the time when there was a lot of people like Bowie, and there was a lot of art and artifice in music, and Alex was a real Scottish rocker.
And I only found out the other day that the Hammer Song on Kicking Against the Pricks was indeed an Alex Harvey cover. And when I found that out, something kind of clicked, because there'd been something at the back of my mind that, now who does Nick Cave remind me of? And of course it occurred to me, of course, it's Alex Harvey.
I sort of felt that because he'd covered that track, he'd sort of got behind what Alex Harvey was about.
I see a lot of Alex Harvey on stage in what Nick does, that particularly when he's in sort of demonic mode.
And it was the most intense experience. I was up against the stage, always up against the stage if I can actually possibly help it, if I can get there in time and stuff. And I was taking photographs as well, but by this time, my film had run out, so I was just having the experience of watching the band. And Nick's doing this version of Black Betty, and it just kept on going and going. And then he's sort of down on the stage in this sort of crouching, like fetal position, sort of like screaming into the stage. A distinct advantage of being at the front, because if you're much further back, you wouldn't have been able to see that. And it was almost like he was lost in the song, and he just kept on singing it like he was mesmerized by the lyrics. And I sort of looked up at the other members of the band, and they're sort of looking sideways one another, sort of grinning. And I realized this was a exceptional version of this particular song.
I was working in Missing Link Records at the time, and CDs were pretty new when Black Betty came out. And we put the CD on, and it came out like a dance mix because there was something wrong with the CD player or the CD. We didn't know. We go, what's going on? Because it was all new. And he was going, whoa, Black Betty, ba-bam, 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 ba-lam, ba-bam, ba-bam, ba-lam, ba-lam, ba-lam. It was like, what the? I'm thinking, this is great. I should tape it while it's wrecked and play it next time I DJ somewhere.
I thought it was a remarkable idea to come up with an album of, if you like, everything from the sacred to the cheesy.
A lot of it was people like, it was songs that had been made famous by Tom Jones or by Gene Pitney, these quite sort of melodramatic 60s showbizy, I think the word he used was entertainment music. Music that was on the edge of being quite corny, but he sort of, he really kind of showed you there was this sort of real tragic essence kind of inside that.
I remember taking it home and playing it to my partner at the time. And I played Something's Got a Hold of My Heart to her, which I thought was just a fantastic piece of music. I didn't know the Gene Pitney version, but she did. And I just said, oh, have listened to this track. And she didn't know that it was that. And I played it and she said, oh, that's fantastic.
I never heard Something's Got a Hold of My Heart before, which I absolutely loved. That was, I just kept that and the singer just over and over again. And it was, because there was no internet and stuff, and there was nobody really to talk to. So, me and my mate would be trying to find out things about songs and about what was going on and stuff. And it was embarrassingly quite a revelation when the Mark Ullman version came out, that it was such a successful song.
Nick's music connects in a very human way. It attacks people by making them realize that there are many, many, many more emotions than just like sad, happy, love. And I think that's what makes his music so special.
I think actually that particular album introduced me to maybe songwriters that I wouldn't have normally explored myself, because someone like Gene Pitney, for God's sake, I would never listen to a Gene Pitney, not willingly, and I really liked the way it had been. All these tracks by sort of artists that I would normally listen to were put through the sort of cave shredder.
Jesus Met the Woman at the Well, who in sort of post-punk music was doing gospel music.
I love those Bad Seeds, sort of chain gang vocals. And I love that song.
And that's what I think is so great about that record is the freedom that's there and the sense of fun and excitement.
You hear the fun that the band are having when they're performing them. There's like a real sense of the sort of the space and the dynamic between them, and the like the kind of camaraderie of the band. And I just enjoy that in a recording so much.
They were wild, anarchic studio sessions. There were a lot of people like myself coming in and dropping tracks on and just hanging out and listening to playbacks and having a good time, basically. And a lot of coming and going. A lot of chaos.
But it was great to play with these musicians and with a singer like Nick. This was great. I mean, it was and is still fantastic because they play really special. I mean, Barry Adamson on bass, Mick Harvey and Brixer as the musicians, and then a singer like this who changing the cover version too in a complete own sound. It was a good beginning.
It was something completely new to me. Completely, it never occurred to me that you could do that. Just play other people's songs, and so we went to the studio in Melbourne, and I believe on the first day we recorded 5 songs, and the next day we recorded 5 songs, and within a week we had like a whole box full of songs.
I was surprised that they recorded quick, very fast. I had this with the other bands in Europe, in Berlin, and that we rehearsed a lot with Die Haut, and we rehearsed a lot. I rehearsed a lot with others.
All of them, not all of them, but most of them I've never heard before. So we heard the original, or somebody was playing it on the guitar, probably Mick was playing it on the guitar, probably the only one capable playing it on the guitar. And then we worked out how we're going to do it. And I worked out some way on playing guitar without playing guitar.
It was a new thing for me to play these cover versions and play normal pop songs. I never played normal pop songs before. Die Haut was a abstract jazz band in the end, and not we never played ballads or pop songs or even cover versions at that time.
I loved doing that. It was fantastic applying these techniques and strategies to existing preformed ideas that needed a different interpretation. That was very enjoyable. I liked that.
It was a little unclear to me working on that record whether the agenda was still about finding really new and unique sounds to include into these tracks, or whether it was more about just trying to do cover versions of them that functioned on a musical level, which I always thought was Mick Harvey's point of view on that record.
I remember that I very much enjoyed playing the guitar on Carnival Is Over, which is just staying on the same position on the strings, playing a slide, and continuously throughout the song turning up the volume. And in the end, I make the strings vibrate in a particular way that I know. And I very much enjoyed that. But it got lost in the mix.
I remember being really perplexed in the mixing sessions of that album by how much of the material that we'd recorded had been taken out, how much of it was removed, and how fragile sometimes the music felt, because a lot of the blocking supports had been pulled out in the mix. And that made quite an impression on me in terms of how to use the studio.
And preciousness couldn't come into it. There was none of that sort of squinting at a pair of speakers, sort of digesting the sound, cogitating, and it's like you had to go for an idea and then just have the balls to finish it.
A song that really convinced me that Nick really didn't know what he was doing is he covered a song called The Carnival Is Over by the Seekers, who were an Australian folk group from the 60s.
Not only does the song have a beautiful innocence and sort of sorrow, but the fact that it was done by the Seekers lends it an even further sort of innocence.
That was the one that surprised me, because they were like this cheesy band doing Morningtown Ride on Top of the Pops.
I mean, it's a great song. It's got great words and a great melody. And in the early 80s, you know, if you were there, you just sort of remember how not done certain things were.
The Seekers were such a huge band for people of our age group in Australia. These really beautiful songs, these lullabies that were on the radio, that you would hear on the radio, that were just that would be so affecting, and it made you feel very secure too. And his version of that song is very faithful, I think, to that feeling.
It reminds me of there's a version of You Are My Sunshine by Brian Ferry from like 1973 or something, and he just makes it the most appallingly sorrowful song that you've ever heard in your life.
Nick could take The Carnival Is Over and turn it into the end of the world.
It was a brave thing to do. But again, I think it was in the spirit of how Nick saw he was developing. I think he needed to kind of. It's a bit like a roadmap. You know, these are, you know, touchstones. These songs are songs that mean things to me. With certain artists, he sort of went, you know, out of his way to kind of not do the obvious, but to do songs that would introduce partly his audience to them. But it was also a way of Nick saying, you know, what I've put down here will give me the freedom to explore those artistic territories.
And then in a lot of these songs, the actual craft of putting together lines, orchestral lines through chords, the way chords work together, I think that's almost like, you know, in some ways, it's like Nick setting himself up for the future to become this great songwriter who worked through melody and chord and putting arrangements together.
The interesting thing about the covers on Kicking Against the Pricks is that they set the groundwork for where Nick Cave went next. I mean, you can see a real move from the early stuff. I mean, the first couple of albums, they're almost, I mean, although they're really good and really powerful, there's a sense that these are, there's a kind of real punk quality to them, in the sense that maybe everybody isn't that great in their instruments. And then I think they learned a lot from doing Kicking Against the Pricks, and all the albums that come after that suddenly gain a lot of power, I think, from the fact that he's tried out all these different things on the covers album.
It just looked to me like somebody saying, this is where I'm going, and if there's all this baggage, if people want me to sing Release the Bats for the rest of my life, then tough shit, I'm not going to do it.
I go when no man before me bothered to go, till the soles of my shoes are shot full of holes, and it's all downhill with a bullet. I was rambling and roving has taken its course. I'm grazing with the dinosaurs and the dear old horses, and the city streets crack and a great hole forces me down. My soapbox, my pulpit, the theater ceiling, the silver star spangled, and the coins in my pocket go jingle, jangle.